Happy Sunday, everybody, and welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. It's the weekend, so today's video will be very focused on foreign affairs. And first up, Vietnam, China. As tensions in the South China Sea continue to boil and strain Beijing's relations with the Philippines, China has sought to strengthen ties with Vietnam, a fast and dynamically growing economy in the region with whom China also has territorial disputes. This week, after the Central Economic Work Conference, General Secretary Xi Jinping made a, quote, short but fruitful, end quote, in the words of state media, state visit to Hanoi. In a speech, Xi celebrated the PRC's assistance in, quote, Vietnam's war against French occupation and its war against U.S. aggression to save the nation, end quote, telling the audience that more than 1,400 Chinese officers and men were killed in the assistance. Of course, Xi Jinping did not bring up China's invasion of the country in 1979. The two countries also signed a joint statement on Wednesday. China and Vietnam agreed to raise ties to a new stage of, quote, greater political mutual trust, more substantive security cooperation, deeper practical cooperation, firmer social foundation, closer multilateral coordination, and better management of differences, end quote. They said they would seek basic and long-term solutions to, quote, maritime disputes, end quote, acceptable to both sides. The joint statement also covered high-level law enforcement exchanges and includes the establishment of, quote, a deputy minister-level dialogue mechanism for political and security issues, end quote. They also promised to boost security cooperation and intelligence sharing with an eye on the risks of the so-called, quote, color revolution posed by hostile forces, end quote. This was pushed heavily in Xi's comments during the state visit too. In a veiled reference to the United States, Xi Jinping said, quote, both sides should be alert to and oppose any attempts to mess up the Asia-Pacific, end quote. Vietnam, of course, is a key player in the important Southeast Asia region. How should we think about this development? Well, Kang Ru, VU, doctorate candidate in the political science department at Boston College, writing in U.S. publication The Diplomat, argues, and we are now quoting him directly, Vietnam joining China's community of common destiny might raise some eyebrows elsewhere that Vietnam endorses an anti-U.S. vision, despite the landmark agreement of its relationship with the United States to the CSP in September. However, such a skepticism, he argues, ignores the fundamental logic of Vietnam's China policy. He continues, since Vietnam normalized ties with China in 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the settlement of the Cambodian quagmire, Hanoi has explicitly adopted a policy of assurance toward China that 1. It always prioritizes relations with Beijing, and 2. That improvements in relations with other countries do not constitute an anti-China policy. Vietnam's policy of assurance serves only one purpose, which is to deter China from invading or coercing Vietnam via the threat of use of force. Hanoi does not want a repeat of the disastrous clashes of the 1970s and 1980s. For Vietnam, the author continues, joining the community of common destiny does not mean Hanoi has made any fundamental changes to its foreign policy. Vietnam remains neutral in the great power competition, and it wants to cultivate closer ties with all countries, including and beyond China and the United States. Importantly, China's policy of assurance should not be seen as appeasement. Vietnam remains determined to protect its maritime sovereignty and leaves open the possibility of cooperating with extra-regional powers to balance against China under its one depend principle. Nevertheless, the author concludes, the fundamental logic remains the same. Vietnam's deterrence against China would only hold when its policy of assurance towards China is working. Now we end this piece here. Other commentators have made similar thoughts. Quote, to the extent Xi wanted to signal an upgrade of relations in form, if not substance, he should be pleased with what he got. But we should also keep in mind that Vietnam is itself deftly managing its relations with the two great powers as it advances its own interests. Hanoi was never going to clearly swing one way or the other, and both Washington and Beijing should be well aware of that. End quote. On his way back to Beijing, Xi stopped off in Nanning in China's southern province of Guangxi, where he spoke on, quote, economic and trade cooperation between China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the development and application of informationalization, and the improvement of urban community governance systems, and strengthening ethnic unity, end quote. We may see more on the China-Southeast Asia front in the coming weeks. Next up, we move now to a week of review of US-China developments. But just one quick thing. I hope you're enjoying today's episode. If you're getting some value from this episode, I only have one ask. That is to like and subscribe. And if you really want to go the extra mile, sharing is also a big help. This is the primary way in which this channel grows. The main way it is shown to new people is if the algorithm is happy, and that means likes and subscribes. It's also worth noting that many have told me that they have been unsubscribed from the channel, so if you believe you should be subscribed, 45% of regular viewers are not subscribed, it may be worth checking this now. For anyone who wants to help keep the channel financially sustainable, which allows me to continue doing this every day, open and free for all, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. My commitment has been a channel open to all that is reliant primarily on subscriber support rather than corporate sponsorship, and with your assistance, I know I can keep it that way. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Let's continue. Next up, as we usually do, let's move through this week's salient developments in US-China relations. In a speech Thursday evening in Washington to the US-China Business Council, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that she plans to visit China again in 2024, seeking to deepen areas of cooperation and improve communication, but also, quote, a significant proportion of the agenda will focus on discussing difficult areas of concern with my counterpart, end quote, adding that the US would continue to pursue export controls and investment restrictions. Quote, we seek not to resolve all our disagreements nor avoid any shocks, but we aim to make our communication resilient so that when we disagree, when shocks occur, we prevent misunderstanding from leading to escalation and causing harm, end quote. Yellen visited Beijing in July. We remember that. We covered that at the time, where she held Let's try that again. We remember that Yellen visited Beijing back in July. She also held extensive talks with Vice Premier He Feng last month in San Francisco during the Biden-Xi meeting. Some commentators have called her a type of good cop in the White House when it comes to China engagement in the Biden administration, pursuing a strategy of compartmentalization, confronting China in certain areas while simultaneously pursuing areas of collaboration. At the event just mentioned on Thursday, she expressed, quote, understanding China's plans, especially how China intends to respond to challenges with local government debt and the real estate market, or how it might react if unexpected weaknesses in its economy should arise, is critical for those of us charged with policymaking in the United States, end quote. She also touched on a topic which we looked at in detail this week, especially in yesterday's video. Quote, too strong a role for state-owned enterprises can choke growth, and an excessive role for the security apparatus can dissuade investment, end quote. Meanwhile, also this week, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin reported on more possible signs that the PRC is going to make more serious efforts to combat trade in fentanyl and its precursors, a theme of particular concern domestically within the United States. In the article, titled China Stresses Prevention of Fentanyl Manufacturing, Trafficking, Caixin writes that since October, authorities in at least 3 parts of the country have carried out special actions to control fentanyl, including a district of Xining in the northwest province of Qinghai, the county of Baiyin in northwest China's Gansu province, and an area in North China's Inner Mongolia, Neimonggu, local authorities reported in recent weeks. The actions are aimed at, quote, mapping out the production, operation, import and export of fentanyl-related drugs, as well as their precursor chemicals, end quote. The authorities in Xinhai specified that they wanted to strengthen investigations into universities and faculty members capable of making fentanyl-type substances, where the authorities in Inner Mongolia conducted checks at medical institutions and pharmacies. This is according to the Caixin report. One result of the recent Xi-Biden meeting was a commitment from Xi that Beijing would do more to combat the deadly trade. It's too early to know if progress has been made and if China will stick to this commitment, but these are positive signs, and we will need to continue watching this space closely. Meanwhile, earlier this week we covered the bipartisan report on economic competition with the PRC from the US House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. We need to supplement this development, which some have called a shocking move, with more coverage now. One of the recommendations of the report was the repeal of China's permanent normal trade relations designation. This point appears to have split Congress. US-based Politico reports that, quote, Congress's China hawks are meeting rare pushback in their campaign to crack down on Beijing. Farm district Republicans and agriculture lobbies increasingly alarm that Congress might just blow up American farmers' largest export market, end quote. Lawmakers and influential agricultural lobby groups led a campaign to soften the language in a high-profile new report, quote, prompting the panel's leaders to pull back from an explicit call to revoke normal trade status with China, a move that would likely mean significantly higher tariffs on a wide swath of Chinese products. End quote. The outlet explains that as word began to circulate that the Select Committee might recommend a repeal of China's permanent normal trade relations designation, which were enabled about 2 decades ago to lower American tariffs on China, certain Republicans quietly joined together with several Democrats who voiced their own reasons to push for revisions. They argued such a drastic step would have catastrophic consequences, especially for US farmers and rural communities. While this is a notable walk back from the US House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, the fact that this was even under serious discussion in this very bipartisan committee is very telling, and it will mean that there is robust debates going forward around trade with China issues more broadly. For example, the report also called for renewing the China Safeguard Act, which expired back in 2013. The act allowed the US to impose tariffs on goods from China that caused so-called market disruptions. It could also be used to target practices that harm US industry. The US House Select Committee report appears to have greatly rattled Beijing, provoking fiery commentaries from state media this week. This is one such example from an editorial with the state-run Global Times published this week. Quote, on December 12th, the US released a 53-page report advocating to reset the terms of economic relations with China, which is essentially promoting a comprehensive decoupling from the Chinese economy. The report listed nearly 150 policy recommendations, including moving China from its current tariff classification, basically a mishmash of ideas on how to achieve decoupling. The report exposes the discernible distortion and pathological psychological state of some American politicians. End quote. Beijing seems concerned, and the fact that a very bipartisan committee published this sort of report with these sort of policy recommendations, and that there is now serious debate around them, suggests that Beijing is right to be concerned. If a kinetic conflict can be avoided, then the war between the US and China will be fought on the battlegrounds of global public opinion, ideology, technology, and trade. Will it be in these latter areas, technology and trade, that a checkmate can occur? We will need to continue following these spaces closely to see how this ongoing competition unfolds. That is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed and got some value from today's video. Have a great Sunday, have a restful weekend, and I will see you all for a new week of China Update tomorrow.